Hey everyone, and welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at Plug Power. That's ticker symbol PLUG. They're a big player in the hydrogen fuel cell space.
Yeah.
All about clean energy.
Right.
And things have been, well, pretty interesting lately. Their stock surged almost 20% just the other day.
Yeah, what's really driving that is all this news about the tax credits for clean hydrogen production. The Inflation Reduction Act back in 2022.
Yeah.
Well, the U.S. Treasury Department, they just clarified which companies are actually going to qualify for those tax credits.
Uh-huh.
And it's huge for Plug Power.
So these tax credits, are they really that big of a deal for Plug Power? 20% jump in stock price? That's a lot.
It's a total game changer. These clarifications mean that companies can get these credits even if they're using energy sources that aren't typically considered green, like renewable natural gas. Or carbon capture. It really lowers the financial risk for hydrogen producers, so a lot more clean energy projects can get up and running, and we're seeing that excitement reflected in Plug Power stock for sure. Since the start of 2025, it's already jumped over 40%.
Wow. Okay, so the market is definitely bullish on hydrogen. But I've also heard some things about Plug Power's performance lately. Maybe not all good news, right?
That's true. The long-term outlook for hydrogen is really exciting. But Plug Power is facing some challenges right now. Their Q3 2024 earnings report wasn't great. Revenue fell short of expectations.
Oh,
and,
wow.
and there are some concerns about, if they can sustain their growth without having to, raise more money.
Yeah, that's never a good sign. It's like needing another loan just to keep the lights on. But I did see projections for a potential revenue rebound in Q4 2024.
Yeah.
Is there some hope there?
Yeah, there could be. That projected Q4 revenue does offer some optimism. Some analysts think that Plug Power could reach break-even margins by the second half of 2025 if sales for their fuel cells and electrolyzers pick up. But that's a big if. It all depends on if they can actually execute their plan.
So we've got this tension, right? The potential of the hydrogen market,
Mm-hmm.
and then Plug Power's ability to capitalize on it. So let's look at the technical side of things for a minute. What did the chart say about Plug Power's future?
Well, technical analysis can give us some clues, but it's not a crystal ball or anything.
Right.
As of January 7th, 2025, Plug Power's stock price is at $3.15. One of the key indicators we look at are moving averages.
Okay.
So, for example, the 8-day and 20-day simple moving averages are both below the current price. That suggests some short-term bullish momentum.
Bullish momentum.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds good. Is that like a buy signal?
Not so fast. You have to look at the long-term trends, too.
Okay.
The 50-day and 200-day moving averages are above the current price. And that's actually a bearish signal. So we're kind of getting mixed messages.
Mixed messages. So it's like a map where north keeps changing. What else can we look at?
Well, let's look at the RSI, the Relative Strength Index. That sits at 43.7 right now,
Okay.
which suggests that the stock is getting close to being oversold, but not quite there yet. This could signal a short-term bounce if buyers come back in. And then we have the MACD, which is slightly positive at 0.03. Again, a hint of bullishness, but very slight.
So every time we see a positive, there's like a counterpoint. It's a real roller coaster.
Investing in a company like Plug Power is definitely not for the faint of heart. You need to be comfortable with volatility and uncertainty. Another key thing to watch are the support and resistance levels.
Okay.
For Plug Power, there's a resistance level at $2.28 and a support level at $1.97.
So what is the significance of those? What happens if the stock breaks above or below those prices?
Well, breaking above resistance could signal a momentum shift, potentially leading to an upward trend. But dropping below support might mean further decline. But remember, technical analysis is just one piece of the puzzle. You have to consider the fundamentals of the company, overall market conditions, and your own risk tolerance.
Okay, so we've got tax credits, mixed earnings, and a bunch of technical signals to watch. What are the analysts saying? Any predictions for Plug Power, short-term or long-term?
Well, analyst forecasts are kind of all over the place for Plug Power, which I think just reflects the uncertainty of the company's future. Short-term projections range from $2.91 to $4.50 by the end of 2025.
Okay.
That's potential downside of about 8% and an upside of around 43%.
Wow, that's a huge swing.
Mm-hmm.
So no clear consensus. What about long-term? Are we talking moonshot territory?
Long-term forecasts are even more speculative. Some analysts think Plug Power could get as high as $10.73 by 2025. But that's under ideal conditions, assuming they can overcome their challenges and really benefit from the growth of the hydrogen economy.
Okay, so over 200% upside. That's tempting. But high risk, high reward. Let's zoom out a bit. Where does Plug Power fit into the hydrogen economy as a whole?
That's a great point. It's not enough to just analyze Plug Power by itself. You need to understand the entire industry that they're operating in. And the good news is the hydrogen economy is showing real signs of growth.
Yeah, I've been hearing that hydrogen is like the fuel of the future, especially for those industries that are hard to decarbonize,
Yeah.
like heavy transportation
Exactly.
or industrial manufacturing.
And Plug Power is positioning themselves to be a key player in that transition. They're making progress in sectors like material handling, think forklifts, warehouse equipment, and stationary power solutions, like backup power for data centers.
Oh, wow.
Or microgrids.
It's wild to think about how this tech could transform so many different industries. I even read that Hong Kong is going to make hydrogen fuel mandatory by 2025.
That's huge. Hong Kong's move just shows how serious governments are getting about hydrogen as an actual alternative to fossil fuels. And Plug Power is working hard to ramp up its hydrogen production to meet that demand. They're also focused on improving their profit margins, which is key for the long term.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot here. Tax credits, mixed earnings,
Yeah.
you have ups and downs of technical analysis, all the analyst predictions, and Plug Power's position in this growing hydrogen market. So what are your takeaways from all of this?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Investing is personal. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Plug Power has a ton of potential, but it's also facing some serious challenges.
It's high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
So what should people consider when they're evaluating Plug Power?
Well, first, your own risk tolerance. Are you comfortable with the volatility of a company at this stage? Second, do your own research. Don't just rely on podcasts or headlines. Look at the financials. Understand the technology. Make your own informed opinion.
And diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Absolutely. Spread your investments.
Yeah.
Different assets, different sectors. And if you're really serious about investing in Plug Power, or really any company for that matter, talk to a financial advisor. They can help you figure out what's best for you.
That's great advice. We've covered a lot of ground today on Investing Talk podcast. But before we wrap up this first part, I have a question for you. What trends in the clean energy space could disrupt Plug Power? For better or worse? It's something to think about as you continue your own research on this really interesting and rapidly evolving industry.
Yeah, that's a great question to think about. The clean energy landscape is always evolving. New technologies and innovations all the time.
Right.
Some of them could be real game changers, even for a company like Plug Power.
It's like trying to predict the weather. One minute it's sunny, the next there's a hurricane.
Right.
So what are some disruptors in the clean energy space that we should be looking out for?
Well, one of the obvious ones is battery technology. We've seen some incredible progress with batteries, like in energy density and cost reduction over the last few years. And this is probably only going to continue.
Yeah, electric vehicles are already challenging gas-powered cars. And batteries are being used in other areas too, like material handling,
Exactly.
which is a key market for Plug Power.
If battery technology keeps advancing at this pace, it could start to chip away at some of the advantages that hydrogen fuel cells have, especially in situations where weight and refueling time aren't as critical.
So it's a race between these two clean energy technologies to see who wins.
I don't think it's necessarily a winner-take-all situation. Batteries and hydrogen both have pros and cons. They'll probably coexist and complement each other in different ways. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
That makes sense. Not always an either or. Are there other potential disruptors out there that could shake things up? Any dark horses?
For sure. One interesting area is the development of synthetic fuels, sometimes called e-fuels.
Synthetic fuels. Sounds like a sci-fi movie.
They might sound futuristic, but synthetic fuels are basically carbon-neutral fuels made with renewable energy sources.
So instead of like drilling for oil or fracking for gas, we could create fuel out of thin air, powered by wind or solar.
That's the idea.
That's mind-blowing.
The idea is to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or from industrial processes and then combine it with hydrogen produced from renewable energy. And this creates a synthetic fuel that can be used in our existing engines and power plants.
So we're closing the loop, taking carbon that's already out there, turning it back into fuel without adding new emissions.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
It has huge potential if synthetic fuels become, commercially viable and the cost is competitive, they could really disrupt the market for hydrogen fuel cells, especially in applications like long-haul trucking or aviation, where batteries just aren't feasible because of weight and range.
Okay, so we've got batteries and synthetic fuels as potential disruptors. Anything else?
Absolutely. We also have to think about regulations. The regulatory landscape is always changing. Government policies and incentives can have a big impact on the clean energy market. For example, stricter emissions standards or carbon taxes could create a really favorable environment for hydrogen fuel cells and could speed up adoption.
Right, it's about creating incentives
Yeah,
to drive innovation and investment in clean energy. But on the other hand, if governments pull back their support for hydrogen or favor other technologies, it could really hurt Plug Power's growth.
exactly. So it's important to watch for any policy changes and how they could impact the industry.
Speaking of the hydrogen industry, we can't forget about the competition.
Right.
Plug Power isn't the only company trying to get a piece of that pie.
There are some established players like Ballard Power Systems
Yeah.
and a bunch of new startups looking to break in. And then you have the energy giants like Shell and BP. They're also investing a lot in hydrogen as part of their transition to a lower carbon future.
It's a crowded field with some big players.
It is.
So how does Plug Power differentiate themselves?
Well, Plug Power has been focusing on building a vertically integrated business model.
Okay.
That means they're involved in every part of the hydrogen value chain.
So they're not just making the fuel cells. They're also producing the hydrogen, building the infrastructure, and working directly with the customers.
That's right. Their goal is to create a complete hydrogen ecosystem, which they think will give them a competitive advantage in the long run.
They're like the Apple of the hydrogen world, controlling the hardware and the software.
That's a great analogy. They are aiming to be the leader in the market, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out with such strong competition.
It's a high-stakes game
Okay.
with a lot of moving parts,
Mhm.
and we'll have to see what happens. But that's what makes investing so interesting, right?
It is. It's all about navigating that uncertainty, weighing the risks and rewards, and making the best decision you can with the information you have.
And that's what we've been doing today on Investing Talk Podcast. We've given you a pretty good overview of Plug Power, the opportunities and the challenges. Now it's up to you to decide if this company is right for you.
Remember, investing is a personal journey. There's no right or wrong answer. The important thing is to do your research, stay informed, and make choices that work for you.
Well said. Speaking of staying informed, we've got one more segment coming up where we'll look at some listener questions and share some more insights, so stick around. Okay, we are back for the final part of our look at Plug Power right here on Investing Talk Podcast.
Looking forward to some listener questions.
I too. Let's jump right in. Our first question comes from Sarah in Seattle. Sarah asks, I'm interested in hydrogen, but I worry about the environment. Is green hydrogen really as clean as it sounds, or are there hidden costs and trade-offs?
That's a great question, Sarah, and I know a lot of investors are thinking about this.
Yeah.
It's really important to understand what green hydrogen actually means. True green hydrogen is made using renewable energy sources, like wind and solar, to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay.
This process is called electrolysis, and it doesn't produce any greenhouse gas emissions, which makes it a truly clean fuel source.
So if the hydrogen is produced using renewable energy, then it's clean and sustainable.
In theory, yes. But there are a few things to consider, like, for instance, making the electrolyzers. The equipment used to produce green hydrogen, that can use a lot of energy. And it requires rare earth minerals, which come with their own environmental impacts.
So it's not just a matter of plugging in a solar panel and getting clean hydrogen out.
Right.
There's a whole supply chain with its own implications.
Exactly.
What about water? Electrolysis needs a lot of water, right?
Yeah, it does, which
You.
could be an issue in some places.
Right. We don't want to solve one problem just to
Correct.
create a new one. So it seems like green hydrogen can be clean. But we have to look at the big picture, make sure the whole process is sustainable.
I think transparency and accountability are key here for any new energy technology.
Okay. On to the next question. This one is from David in Dallas. David asks, what are the biggest risks for Plug Power, even if the hydrogen economy takes off?
That's another good question, David. No investment is without risk, and Plug Power is no different. One risk is execution risk. They have ambitious plans to expand, build out their hydrogen ecosystem, but there could be delays and cost overruns along the way.
Right. And we can't forget about the competition. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Plug Power is in a very competitive industry, a lot of big players.
They need to stay ahead of the curve in terms of their technology, their costs. and their customer relationships.
Another risk is regulations. Government policies can change.
Absolutely.
That could impact Plug Power's growth.
And then there are the financial risks. Plug Power has a history of losses, and they've needed to raise capital to stay afloat. If they can't become profitable, it will hold them back.
So even if hydrogen takes off, there's still a lot of risks for Plug Power.
That's true. Investing in a company like this takes a certain amount of risk tolerance.
Okay, time for one last question. This one comes from Maria in Miami. Maria asks, if I want to invest in hydrogen, should I go with a company like Plug Power or take a more diversified approach?
That's a great question, Maria. It really depends on your own goals and risk tolerance. A pure play like Plug Power could mean big returns if hydrogen really explodes, but it's also risky if something goes wrong. You could lose your investment.
On the other hand, a more diversified approach, like an ETF, would spread the risk across multiple companies.
Right. An ETF could give you exposure to hydrogen, but also other clean energy areas, like solar wind batteries.
So it really comes down to your risk appetite and how much faith you have in Plug Power
Exactly.
versus the whole clean energy sector.
There's no right or wrong answer here. It's about finding the right strategy for you.
Well, that wraps up our look at Plug Power here on Investing Talk Podcast. We hope you found this episode helpful.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. And